Between 1840 and 1899, hundreds of American newspapers reported on something that does not appear in any modern history textbook: stories of buried cities found during basement excavations in Ohio, skeletons over 9 feet tall pulled from burial mounds in Wisconsin, cast iron building facades that arrived in towns the railroad had not yet reached, cathedrals standing in cities that were officially 3 years old, domes, stonework, and copper roofs in places that had supposedly been frontier wilderness 1 decade earlier. These were not tabloids. These were the most respected newspapers of their day. They had circulation in the hundreds of thousands. Their editors were household names. Their reporters won awards from international press associations. And then, one by one, they vanished, bought out, folded, absorbed, renamed. By 1925, nearly every American newspaper that had printed those stories was either dead or owned by the same handful of new investors. This is the story of 10 of them. The year each one was founded, what they reported, and the exact year they were quietly bought, closed, or rewritten out of existence. If you want to know how the historical record was actually changed, stay until the end. And if you find this useful, hit subscribe before we go any further. The investigations that get buried this deep do not stay on the platform for long. Number 10. The Cincinnati Commercial. Founded in 1843 in a city that, according to the official timeline, had only existed for 55 years, the Cincinnati Commercial covered what was then considered the western edge of American civilization. Its reporters traveled by riverboat into the Ohio Valley and filed regular dispatches on what they were finding. Burial mounds the size of pyramids, earthworks shaped like perfect octagons stretching for miles, stone walls cut with precision that local stonemasons admitted they could not replicate. The paper ran a multi-part investigation in 1872 on the so-called Newark earthworks, asking how a population of supposed nomadic tribes had constructed a geometric complex larger than most European capitals. The reporter who wrote that series, Murrah Halstead, was one of the most respected journalists in the country. In 1883, the Commercial merged with the Cincinnati Gazette under new ownership. By 1896, the combined paper was sold again, this time to a syndicate connected to railroad financiers. The earthworks coverage was discontinued. The original reporting was archived, then lost. Today, the Newark earthworks are credited to a vague pre-Columbian culture about which almost nothing else is known. Number 9. The Boston Investigator. The Boston Investigator was founded in 1831 and was unusual for its era. It published scientific findings, free-thought essays, and dispatches from archaeologists who were not affiliated with universities. In the 1850s, it ran a series of reports on stone structures found in the New England woods, slab-roof chambers aligned to the solstices, standing stones engraved with what appeared to be early alphabetic script. The reports were dismissed by the official scientific establishment as colonial root sellers, but the investigator kept publishing the field notes anyway, including measurements that matched no known farmhouse architecture. In 1869, the paper changed hands. The new owner restructured its editorial direction toward what was called modern rationalism, which in practice meant the chamber stories stopped. By 1904, the Investigator was absorbed into a larger publication and ceased to exist under its own name. The chambers it had documented are still there, in the woods of Vermont and New Hampshire, and visitors still ask the same questions the paper was asking in 1855. Number 8. The Philadelphia Public Ledger. Founded in 1836, the Public Ledger was the largest penny paper in the country during its peak years. It published in a city that, according to the standard chronology, had been a small Quaker settlement only 150 years earlier. Yet the Ledger ran regular features on Philadelphia's pre-existing architecture, buildings with vaulted basements that predated their own deeds, cast-iron storefronts whose foundries had no known address, underground tunnels found during gas line installation, with brickwork that confused the workmen who broke into them. In 1864, the paper ran a now-forgotten editorial asking why the city's water and sewer infrastructure appeared to have been laid before the city was officially platted. The editor of that piece, William Swain, died the following year under circumstances that were not fully explained at the time. The public ledger was sold to George William Childs in 1864 and again to Cyrus H. K. Curtis in 1913, who absorbed it into his publishing empire. The infrastructure questions were never asked again in print. Number 7. The New York Sun. The Sun was founded in 1833 and became famous for what its rivals called sensational reporting. What that actually meant is that the Sun published things other papers would not. In the 1860s, it ran a long series on the discovery of pre-existing foundations under New York City streets, including stonework found during the construction of the early subway shafts. In the 1870s, it covered the World's Fair circuits in detail, asking publicly how the so-called temporary cities at these fairs, which were sometimes the size of small countries, could be built in months and then demolished in weeks. The numbers, the Sun noted, did not add up. The labour force did not exist. The material supply chains did not exist. The paper kept asking. In 1916, the Sun was purchased by Frank Munsey, a financier known for buying newspapers and changing their editorial direction. By 1950, after several more sales and mergers, the Sun ceased publication entirely. Its archives are partially digitized today, but the World's Fair series is difficult to locate, even in major library collections. Number 6. The Chicago Inter-Ocean. Founded in 1872, the Inter-Ocean covered the rebuilding of Chicago after the Great Fire of 1871, and it asked questions about that rebuilding that no one asks today. How was a city of 300,000 people, with its commercial core completely destroyed, reconstructed in granite, marble, and cast iron within 3 years? Where did the stone come from? Who carved it? The Inter-Ocean ran an investigation in 1877, noting that the rebuilt downtown contained ornamental work, including fluted columns and carved capitals that no Chicago workshop was advertising in the trade directories of the time. The paper followed the question for over a decade. In 1914, the Inter-Ocean was sold to Herman Henry Colsatt, then resold, then folded, into the Chicago Record Herald, which itself was absorbed into the Chicago American. The questions about the post-fire reconstruction quietly disappeared from the journalistic record. Number 5. The San Francisco Call. Founded in 1856, the call covered the explosive growth of San Francisco, a city that the official timeline says went from a few hundred residents to a metropolis of 200,000 in less than a generation. The Call's reporters were not satisfied with that story. In a series of articles published between 1881 and 1889, the paper documented buildings standing in San Francisco whose construction dates could not be verified. Foundations encountered during regrading that did not appear on any survey, and a network of underground passages found beneath Chinatown that predated, by the workers' own testimony, any structure above them. After the 1906 earthquake, much of this documentary record was lost. The Call itself was purchased by John D. Spreckles, then by William Randolph Hearst's organization in 1913, then merged with the San Francisco Bulletin in 1929. The earthquake, in retrospect, did two things. It collapsed inconvenient buildings, and it provided cover for the disappearance of inconvenient archives. Number 4. The New York Tribune. Horace Greeley founded the Tribune in 1841, and under his editorship it became one of the most influential papers in the United States. Greeley personally took an interest in the Mound Builder controversy, which was the 19th century debate over who had constructed the massive earthworks found throughout the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. The Tribune published field reports describing giant skeletons, copper crowns, and stone tablets engraved with characters that resembled no known American script. After Greeley's death in 1872, the Tribune's coverage of these topics narrowed. By 1924, the Tribune was merged with its longtime rival, the New York Herald, to form the New York Herald Tribune. By 1966, even that successor paper was dead. The mound builder coverage from the 1850s and 1860s is now treated as embarrassing 19th century pseudoscience, even though it was filed by the same reporters who covered the Civil War with accuracy that historians still rely on. Number 3. The St. Louis Globe Democrat. The Globe Democrat had roots going back to 1852 and covered a city that was, in the second half of the 19th century, hosting the largest World's Fair ever constructed in North America. The 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition covered nearly 2 square miles and featured palaces of agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, and electricity, each of them larger than most European cathedrals. The Globe Democrat covered the fair's construction and demolition in detail, and it asked in print how the demolition was possible. The buildings were described in the fair's own promotional material as temporary, made of staff, which is a mixture of plaster and fibres. The Globe Democrat ran photographs showing what looked like granite columns and marble floors. The paper asked who ordered the demolition, who profited from the salvage contracts, and where the recovered material went. After several ownership changes, the Globe Democrat ceased publication in 1986. Its archives on the 1904 fair are still being digitized. The questions it raised about the fair's construction and disappearance have not been answered. Number 2. Frank Leslie's Illustrated Newspaper. Founded in 1855, Frank Leslie's was the first major American newspaper to publish engraved illustrations of news events on a weekly basis. Its illustrators travelled with reporters and produced detailed drawings of the buildings, ruins, and discoveries the papers covered. Some of those engravings are the only surviving visual record of structures that no longer exist. World's Fair pavilions, buildings demolished in the great urban renewal waves of the 1890s, architecture in American cities that bore no resemblance to what would later be built on the same lots. Frank Leslie himself died in 1880. His widow took over the paper and ran it under her own name. After several changes in ownership, it was sold to William Randolph Hearst's organization in 1902 and reformatted. By 1922, the paper had ceased publication. The engravings survive in scattered library collections, and they show an America that, in many places, looked nothing like the America that was photographed in the same locations only 20 or 30 years later. Number 1. The New York Herald. Founded in 1835 by James Gordon Bennett, the Herald was, for much of the 19th century, the largest newspaper in the United States. Bennett's reporters were sent everywhere. They covered the discovery of giant skeletons in Wisconsin mounds in 1851. They covered the excavation of pre-existing stone walls during the construction of Central Park in 1858, with measurements and photographs included. They covered the Paris Exposition of 1889 with skepticism, asking openly how the Iron Tower built for that fair had been constructed on the schedule announced. After Bennett's death in 1872, his son, James Gordon Bennett Jr., ran the paper. Bennett Jr. moved to Paris and ran the Herald from there for decades. In 1924, the Herald was sold and merged with the Tribune. The merged paper was sold again in 1958. By 1966, it was dead. The Wisconsin skeleton coverage, the Central Park excavation, and the Paris Tower skepticism are gone from the popular memory of the Herald. The original issues still exist in microfilm in a handful of research libraries. They are not what most people would expect a 19th century newspaper to contain. So here is the pattern. 10 of the largest, most respected, most widely circulated American newspapers of the 19th century. Each of them reporting in their own time on things that today are dismissed as fringe theory, conspiracy, or pseudoscience. Each of them sold, merged, absorbed, or shut down between 1864 and 1986, with the heaviest concentration of buyouts and closures falling between 1900 and 1930. That window is not a coincidence. It is the same window during which the public school history curriculum was standardized, the major academic publishing houses were consolidated, and the encyclopedias that would shape 20th century reference works were rewritten under new ownership. You do not have to believe in any specific theory about the past to notice the pattern. You only have to ask what these papers were reporting on, who bought them, and what happened to the stories afterward. The buyers, when you trace them back, are not a long list. The same names appear over and over: Frank Munsey, William Randolph Hearst, Cyrus Curtis, Joseph Pulitzer's later organization, a handful of financial syndicates with overlapping investors. By 1930, the front pages of American newspapers, which had once been written by independent editors with strong opinions about what the public should know, were being shaped by a much smaller group of owners with much more uniform interests. And the stories that disappeared first were always the same kind of stories. Stories about structures that should not exist. Stories about populations that should not have been able to build what they built. Stories about world's fairs whose construction schedules were impossible. Stories about excavations that turned up bones, walls, and artifacts the official timeline could not account for. Those stories did not get debunked. They simply stopped being printed. The original issues are still out there. In microfilm rooms, in university basements, in private collections. The reporting did not vanish. The public memory of the reporting vanished. That is a different thing. And once you start reading the actual 19th century front pages, side by side with the modern textbooks that supposedly summarize them, the gap is not subtle. It is enormous. The textbooks describe a frontier of log cabins and dirt roads. The newspapers describe domes, cast iron, granite arcades, underground passages, and earthworks no one could account for. Both versions cannot be true. One of them was edited. The truth was printed. Then it was bought. Now it is your turn to read it.